Today, we're diving into a really fundamental question. How do you actually verify that someone is a prophet? We're going to explore two incredible encounters from the 7th century where the prophethood of Muhammad was put to the test, not by his followers, but by some of the most powerful outsiders of his time.
I mean, seriously, think about it. If someone showed up tomorrow and said they were speaking for God, what would it take to convince you? What kind of test could possibly work? Well, this wasn't just a thought experiment back in the early days of Islam. It was very, very real. You know, right now, there are projects using artificial intelligence to comb through and verify hundreds of thousands of ancient religious texts. It's amazing. But 1,400 years ago, there was no AI, no databases. Verification was a face-to-face, human-to-human thing. It relied on reason, scripture, and just raw conviction. All right, so here's our roadmap. First, we're going to look at a kind of political investigation by a Roman emperor. Then we'll jump into a super high-stakes theological debate, a really dramatic challenge, and finally see how it all ended with a landmark treaty. So our first case study takes us right into the court of one of the most powerful men in the world at that time, the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius. He conducted this methodical, almost forensic investigation into the new prophetic claim that was coming out of Arabia. So let's get the timing right, because context is everything here. This isn't happening in a vacuum. By about 629, the early Muslim community was really becoming a diplomatic force to be reckoned with. After the migration to Medina and signing a huge truce, they were on the map. So the prophet's letter to Heraclius, this wasn't from some random preacher. It was from the leader of a rising power. And this is where Heraclius does something brilliant. To get the real story, he doesn't call in a follower. No, he tracks down the prophet's chief political rival at the time, a guy named Abu Sufyan, who just happened to be in the area on a trade mission. He figured, if you want the unvarnished truth, ask the opposition. Now, what's so fascinating here is the kind of questions Heraclius asks. He's not asking about miracles or splitting moons. He's running through a checklist. He asks about his family, if he's copying anyone, if he's just trying to get a kingdom back. He's building a profile, you see, testing for specific signs of prophethood he already knew from his own scriptures. And yet this, Abu Sufyan, his enemy, answers every single question honestly. And here is where you can see exactly how Heraclius' mind was working. For every answer Abu Sufyan gave, the emperor had a reason. Okay, noble family? Check. Prophets usually come from good lineage. No ancestor was a king? Good. That means he's not just trying to reclaim an old throne. And this one is my favorite. A person who has never been caught lying to other people probably isn't going to start by making up a lie about God. It's just pure logic. And this is the incredible conclusion. Based entirely on the testimony of an enemy, the emperor of the Byzantine Roman Empire is convinced. He says that this new prophet's authority is going to spread right into the heart of his own empire. The political test was passed. It's an amazing lesson, right? When you can't assess the message directly, you assess the character of the messenger. Okay, so he passed a political test from a total outsider. But next up was a totally different kind of challenge, one from people within the same Abrahamic family. We're shifting gears now from an emperor's quiet investigation to a full-blown theological showdown with a delegation of Christian scholars. So a couple of years later, a big delegation of about 60 Christian leaders, we're talking bishops, theologians, the whole group, travels all the way from a Christian stronghold in Yemen just to debate the prophet Muhammad. And the topic? The one thing they absolutely had to hash out? The nature of Jesus. So the debate really boiled down to these core disagreements. The delegation from Najran said, look, Jesus had no human father, so he must be the Son of God. The Quranic response, delivered by the prophet, was, well, think about Adam. He had no father or mother. Was he God? They pointed to Jesus' miracles as proof he was divine. The Islamic view countered that all prophets performed miracles, but only with God's permission. It wasn't proof of their own divinity. But even after all the arguments, nobody budged. They had gone as far as logic and scripture could take them. Both sides were completely certain they were right, and they just hit a wall. The conversation was at a total standstill. So, what do you do when human reason just can't solve a question about ultimate truth? Well, this is where things take a really dramatic turn. With the debate totally stuck, the prophet issues a challenge to basically move beyond human argument and take it straight to God for a final verdict. Yeah, they were at a complete impasse. argument had failed. They needed a different kind of proof. And that new path was something called a mubahala. This is an ancient and incredibly serious thing. You can think of it like a spiritual duel. Both sides get together and they formally pray and ask God to place a curse on whichever side is knowingly lying. It is the absolute final test of conviction. And this is the actual challenge, right from the Quran. Notice it's not just an individual thing. He says, let's bring our sons and our women and ourselves. You have to bring your own family to stand with you under this potential divine judgment. You can't imagine higher stakes. So when the day came for the mubahala, the prophet didn't show up with his army or his strongest companions. He walked out with the people he loved most in the world, his daughter Fatima, his son-in-law Ali, and his two little grandsons, Hassan and Hussein. This action screamed confidence. He was literally willing to risk his entire family on the truth of his message. Now, when the Christian delegation saw this, they stepped aside to talk it over. After a very serious huddle, they came back and gave their answer. They would not do it. They declined the challenge. So why back down? Well, according to the historical sources, their leaders said, look, if this man really is a prophet and we go through with this, we're finished. God's curse will destroy us. The risk was just too terrifying. And that's the key here. The prophet's absolute, unwavering conviction, his willingness to put his own family on the line, that became a more powerful proof for them than any argument ever could. So this ultimate theological test didn't actually end with a winner and a loser. It ended with something totally different. It was a pivot, away from confrontation and towards cooperation. It laid the groundwork for a historic peace agreement. And this is what they agreed to. The Christians of Najran would stay Christian. No forced conversions. They would run their own affairs, and their churches and their property would be protected by the Muslim state. In exchange for that protection, they'd pay a yearly tax. For its time, this was a really remarkable deal. And what's really important is that this wasn't just a one-off thing. The Treaty of Najran actually became the blueprint, the model for how the early Islamic State would deal with other religious communities, creating a legal status for protected people who could keep their own faith and their autonomy. And that brings us to the end. From an emperor's logical checklist to a spiritual showdown that ended in a peace treaty, these stories are just a fascinating window into the past.